All right, taking a look at some issues pertaining to immigration and urbanization, the development of cities in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Okay, so looking at why immigrants are coming to America in this time period, you got push factors, things that are driving people away. In parts of Eastern Europe, particularly parts of Russia, you have the pogroms or pogroms, either way you say it's fine. These are government sanctioned attacks on Jewish settlements. So many of the Jews living in those areas due to threats of violence or outright violence, were leaving their homelands, seeking, political and religious freedoms. Population pressure was another big issue in Europe. Europe's a pretty small continent. There's not a lot of land available, so a lot of people were just leaving to seek opportunities in America. Remember, America has the Homestead Act going on and other land incentives that are pulling people to it. It's an attractive offer for people that didn't have land. Europe's had this long-standing feudal system that has limited ownership of land. So the United States is a very attractive offer for many Europeans. Political unrest, a lot of political, social upheaval, a lot of police and military brutality, lack of basic freedoms, both politically and religious freedoms. So the democratic principles and values of the United States are a pretty attractive offer for many people in Europe. Again, other pull factors. What's attracting people, Europeans, to America? Uh, the industrialization of America is probably the number one factor. Lots of industrial jobs. Many Europeans already had existing families that were in the United States. There was very extensive recruiting efforts by steamships and railroad companies to get people to come over. Of course, the more people that are using their lines, the more money they're making. So, pretty heavy recruiting from those industries. And like I said before, the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, all of the things that are in our Bill of Rights that protect personal freedoms. It's a very attractive thing for many Europeans who exist in these government systems that are very oppressive and deny them their social freedoms. Getting to the United States, it's not easy. If you're traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, that's probably at least a week and a half long journey. You're in a cramped steerage. More often than not, most people coming this time period are relatively poor. They can't afford first class tickets, so they're riding in steerage, the bottom of the ship. They're often packed in there with the animals and cargo. It's a very uncomfortable journey. And due to the close quarters, oftentimes disease would run rampant in these ships. So a lot of people would get sick on the way over. And if you're crossing from the Pacific, it's about a 2.5, 3 week journey. Same kind of conditions, riding in steerage, pretty uncomfortable. And usually you're saving up, what little money you have to make this journey. If you're crossing the Atlantic, more likely than not, you're going to end up in Ellis Island. This is the receiving station for most of the immigrants crossing the Atlantic. Once you got there, you'd have to take a physical exam. They would ask you some questions. They're trying to make sure that you're, physically fit and you're not sick or bringing in disease, that sort of thing. They're also trying to weed out any criminal elements or anything like that. Uh, this is where we get sort of the Americanization of people's names. If it was too hard to spell or understand, the guys in the processing station would just literally spell it like it sounds and move on. That's probably how my name got changed around. I don't know how Gonio is pronounced Ganya, but I'm guessing it has something to do with this time period. If you're coming across in the west, if you're coming across the Pacific Ocean, more likely than not, you're entering through Angel Island, just off of San Francisco. This is the West Coast equivalent to Ellis Island. And like I said, the processing at these places, long, difficult sort of process. Could range anywhere from 3 to 10 hours. Sometimes people were held for a day or two, and sometimes people were turned back if they were sick. Long lines, bring one baggage, bring all your possessions that you can fit into one bag. The rest of it you're leaving behind. Here you can see those physical exams. They're looking for any sort of disease. They'd give you a meal. And then, if you had to stay for an extensive period, quarters are pretty tight. But, at this point, they're probably used to it from riding steerage. Again, looking at the difference of immigrants here in the mid to late 1800s, early 1900s, we're looking at this new immigrant. And they're different from the old immigrants and from the region in which they come from. The new immigrants are coming from Eastern and Southern Europe, also from Asia. Um, Typically, like different types of religions that we, from what we had seen prior in previous immigration periods. And typically, the laborers that were coming over were unskilled. Not that all of them were, but typically, most of them were unskilled, and typically, they were poor. Just to give you a geographic sense of where we're talking about here. So this is kind of like the dividing line. This is the old immigrants. Think colonial times. Think of like late 1700s, early 1800s. The new immigrants are coming from Eastern and Southern Europe, this region over here. And again, vast cultural differences, despite the fact that they're both from the same continent. Once they would arrive in America, adapting to American life could be difficult. Most immigrants stayed where they landed. Again, they spent most of their life savings, or what little money they had, just getting here. So traveling further west or to different cities was difficult. So oftentimes, many would just stay right in New York City if that's where they arrived. The neighborhoods in which they would congregate or live in were called ghettos or ethnic neighborhoods. People wanted to live amongst their own people. They had the same cultures, the same language, same ethnicity, same religious practices. So it was like a sense of comfort living amongst people that you were familiar with or shared the same cultural aspects. So this is why we see like Little Italy or Chinatowns, not just in New York City, but in all major cities and towns throughout America. We see this sort of settlement pattern. Uh, and as they're arriving, and as they get settled in, they start to live here. They start to acculturate. They start to keep some of their old traditions, and they also start to blend in some of the new American cultures too. So sometimes we refer to this as the melting pot theory, where we bring in all the different cultures and different aspects of different people from around the world, and it all kind of melts together and creates this new, unique American culture. A more sort of contemporary take on this acculturation is the salad bowl theory, where you bring in all the different types of cultures, but we don't change them, we don't blend them, we let them stay as they are. We don't want to impose another culture upon another, or say that one is better than the other. So we kind of let them all kind of mix in, kind of like a salad, right? All the salad ingredients don't change; it just adds more flavor to the salad with the more variety that you bring in. And then, of course, as more and more people came in, we start to see opposition to immigration. Just like industrialization was happening so rapidly and so fast, people had a hard time adjusting to that. And just with the same sort of speed in which we were industrializing, we were rapidly changing our culture too, with all these different types of people coming in with their new cultures. And people were afraid of this. People were, you know, not able to adjust as quickly to the rapid cultural developments and changes. So we get these people called nativists who sought to limit immigration, to cut it off. They were worried about, too much different religious influences, too much different political influences. A lot of the people coming from Eastern Europe had vastly different political beliefs. Some of the people from those areas tended to be associated with governments more in line with socialist or communist government beliefs. Um, this also leads to the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. Again, people from Asia were vastly different culturally, ethnically from Americans, and they suffered quite a bit of discrimination. And the Chinese Exclusion Act sought to really limit the amount of Chinese coming in, which is kind of sad because without the Chinese labor force, uh, large portions of the Transcontinental Railroad wouldn't have been built, and they also provided a rich traditional and cultural aspect to American culture too. Other nativist policies. In 1907, we create the Gentleman's Agreement. This one is targeted towards the Japanese. The U.S. agrees to end segregation in schools if Japan agrees to stop sending over workers. Um, we also see the Quota Acts of 1921 and 1924. These are both aimed at preventing that communist element from entering the United States. The communist revolution takes place in 1917, and this is kind of uh, also coinciding with this mass immigration period. So we're worried about that communist element coming into America. So we start to limit the percentage of Russian or Eastern European immigrants um, based on the number that came in 1910. So we're trying to like precede the Russian Revolution so we can kind of weed out that communist element. And then the Quota Act of 1924 is the same sort of principle, but they're going back even further to further weed out potential communists from entering the United States. And you can see in this political cartoon here, this funnel, we're trying to like basically narrow down the flow or restrict the flow of immigrants coming in from Europe. And we also instituted literacy tests. Yep, the same literacy tests that we saw during the Reconstruction era to prevent Black people from voting. We are now instituting literacy tests to keep immigrants from coming to America. If you can't read, if you can't speak English, then you may not enter. And in terms of where people are settling, we see massive developments of our urban infrastructures in urban areas. Urbanization, of course, is the development of cities. We transition from a rural-based country to a urban-based country. And you can see here in this chart the numbers from 1870 to 1900, how drastically those numbers go up. So people are moving to the cities because they offer more jobs. That's usually where our industrial centers are. The cities just had more things to do. There was just more offerings, more cultural offerings. So the cities became a major draw. We also have in this time period this mass migration of Black people who, post Civil War Reconstruction era are moving north as well. They're taking advantage of the industrialization. There's not a lot of opportunities in the South. Most of them are like sharecropping or farming, and that's not really profitable. So they're also seeking opportunities in industry up north. Um, People needed to live close to where they worked in the late 1800s. We still don't have the car or fully functioning, fully developed mass transit systems yet. So people had to crowd around the industrial centers, and they would live in these tenements, these uh, apartment buildings. They were cramped, they were tiny. The people that own them were trying to, you know, cram as many people in there as possible to increase their rent intakes. But it made for really poor living conditions. Here's another picture of a tenement, pretty run down. More tenements, more tenements. Like I said, just pack them in really tight living quarters. Sometimes they're literally just building lean-tos off of the side of existing buildings. Here's a one-room apartment, just beds, cots everywhere, and that's about it. General layout, like I said, the inner city is where your poor is, your industrial centers, and then as you work your way outside of the city, people tend to get more wealthy. And we also see the development of skyscrapers in the cities too. Buildings are getting taller, real estate space is limited, so we got to build up. We can't build out anymore.